Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into maximizing study effectiveness, especially if you're feeling a little bit swamped by all that schoolwork.
Absolutely. And we have a fantastic sponsor for today's deep dive. It's cloutfit.ai.
That's CLOUTFIT.ai.
They're a B2B fashion commerce platform, really cool, using AI to boost user engagement and ultimately increase their clients' revenue.
Now, speaking of smart choices, you, our awesome listeners, have sent us a whole bunch of notes, excerpts, all from Brian Tracy's book, Eat That Frog for Students.
Yeah, it seems like you're ready to tackle that procrastination monster and make your study time really count.
Absolutely. So let's do this. We're going to be exploring the power of mindset,
Uh-huh.
setting the table. That's an interesting one. The 80-20 rule,
Right.
and of course the super famous eat that frog technique. But don't worry, no actual frog consumption is required for this episode.
Definitely not. What I find so fascinating about Tracy's approach is that, he really gets that just having a bunch of techniques isn't enough. You need a solid foundation, just like, when you're building a house. That's why he puts so much emphasis on mindset, even before he dives into any specific strategies.
Okay, mindset. So I get that. That makes sense. But what does that actually mean for like a student who's, let's say, totally freaking out about a big exam coming up?
Okay, picture this. You've got this massive textbook, right? It's intimidating, self-doubt creeps in, and that little voice in your head is like, you'll never get this.
Yeah.
But a strong mindset, built on self-esteem, that voice says, I can conquer this, even if it takes a bit of time and effort.
So self-esteem, it's not just about like feeling good about, what you're wearing.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's about truly believing in your ability to learn.
Exactly. And Tracy's own story is a great example. He actually dropped out of high school, worked all sorts of odd jobs before he turned his life around, went on to earn his MBA, became a successful author and speaker. And his journey, it shows us that even if you haven't always been, the straight-A student, you can still achieve amazing things.
That's really inspiring. Shows that anyone can shift their mindset and, go after their goals.
Absolutely. Now, alongside self-esteem, Tracy really emphasizes personal responsibility,
Okay.
especially important for students who are kind of transitioning from, being guided by their parents to taking charge of their own learning.
So instead of pointing fingers at the teacher, blaming the textbook, you're taking ownership. Like, this is my education.
You got it. You can't control everything, but you can control how you react, the choices you make. So instead of complaining about a tough subject, ask yourself, what's one thing I can control here?
Right.
Maybe it's putting in an extra study session or finding a different way to approach that material.
I love that. It's like empowering yourself to actually make a difference.
Exactly. And the third pillar of mindset, according to Tracy, is goal orientation. So it's not just about those grades. It's about connecting your studies to, like, your long-term vision, what you want for your life.
I actually remember reading that Tracy considers having that long-time perspective to be like the biggest predictor of success.
It's huge. People who can really visualize the long-term effects of their actions, they tend to be far more successful. So for students, it's asking, what do I want my life to look like after I graduate? And how does mastering this specific subject help me get there?
So even if a subject seems, totally boring, connecting it to your bigger dreams, that can make it feel a little more meaningful, right? And maybe even motivating.
Absolutely. Now, once you've got this solid foundation of mindset, Tracy moves into some really practical time management techniques.
Okay, time management. That's definitely something I could have used a lot more help with back in the day. Who hasn't felt completely overcome by all the assignments, all the readings, and then, extracurriculars on top of that?
Feeling overwhelmed is completely normal. But Tracy argues that the key is to move from feeling overwhelmed to feeling organized.
Right.
And one of his most powerful tools for this is this concept of setting the table.
Setting the table. I like that. It's like before you start cooking a big meal, you get everything prepped and ready, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the whole process, smoother and maybe even more enjoyable.
Exactly. Tracy outlines a 7-step goal-setting process. Now, we won't go through every single step, but let's highlight a couple that are super relevant to students.
Okay.
First, write down your goals. Sounds simple, right?
Yeah.
But Tracy emphasizes that just this act alone triggers your subconscious to start working on solutions.
Really? So even just like putting pen to paper can increase your chances of success.
It's like planting a seed for your success that can actually grow while you're sleeping. And then, of course, they're setting deadlines.
Yeah.
Deadlines, they create a sense of urgency. And that's crucial for overcoming procrastination.
Yeah, a lot of us struggle with that, especially when those deadlines seem so far away.
And that's where sub-deadlines come in. Even if your paper's not due for, let's say, a month, setting mini deadlines for each step, like research, outlining, first draft, can make that whole process much more manageable.
Yeah, it's like breaking down that marathon into like shorter sprints, right?
Precisely. And once you have those goals and deadlines in place, you can start thinking strategically about how to use your time. And this is where Tracy's concept of strategic time chunks comes in.
Strategic time chunks. Okay, tell me more.
Think about it like this. You wouldn't try to, like, cram a giant suitcase into a tiny backpack.
Right.
The same goes for your study time. You need to match the size of the task to the amount of time you actually have.
Okay, so if I only have like a short break, I shouldn't try to tackle that huge research paper.
Right. Use that short break for a small fish task, like reviewing flashcards or quizzing yourself on some key concepts. Save the big fish tasks, like writing essays, studying for exams, for when you have those longer blocks of uninterrupted time.
So it's all about being really intentional with how I use every little chunk of time, whether it's, 15 minutes or 2 hours.
Exactly. And Tracy actually recommends that you pre-plan your study blocks, just like you would schedule your classes, right?
Right.
Create a visual, like a calendar for your week, even for your free time, and assign specific tasks to those blocks.
Wow, that's a really cool idea. It's like you're designing your own curriculum for success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by committing to these pre-planned blocks, you're much more likely to stick to that study schedule, avoid that last-minute scramble.
Yeah, less stress, less overwhelm.
For sure.
So we talk about mindset, strategic time management.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those subjects that, let's be real, we just don't enjoy? Not every class is going to be our absolute favorite.
That's true. But Tracy offers some really insightful strategies for tackling even those less than thrilling subjects. He argues that the key is to shift our focus from enjoyment to consequences.
Consequences. So, like, if I don't study this, I'll totally fail the test.
Funny.
Yeah, that's motivating, but also kind of stressful, right?
It's not just about fear of failure, though. It's about connecting that task to the bigger picture.
Okay.
So instead of thinking, ugh, I hate history, you ask yourself, what happens if I do master this subject? What doors could it open?
Right.
Could it lead to interesting career paths? Could it, like, deepen my understanding of the world?
So instead of just focusing on, like, the immediate discomfort, I should think about those long-term benefits.
Exactly. And even when you get the why behind a task, sometimes starting can still be a hurdle, especially if it feels huge and overwhelming.
Yeah, that's where I get stuck. Like, I just look at a huge assignment and I freeze.
And that's where Tracy's analogy of mile markers comes in. Imagine crossing the Sahara Desert, right? The vastness can feel super daunting, but by focusing on just reaching one mile marker at a time, the journey becomes more manageable.
Oh, okay. So instead of thinking, I have to write this whole 20-page paper, I break it down. Research, outline, first draft. Like each of those becomes a mile marker.
Exactly. And each completed mile marker, it gets you closer to the finish line. It also gives you a boost of motivation to keep going.
It's like, okay, I may not be there yet, but I'm definitely making progress.
You got it. And speaking of progress, this brings us to something really important, avoiding what Tracy calls the single-handling trap.
The single-handling trap. Okay, what's that?
It's that tendency to, like, start and stop a task over and over,
Okay.
constantly interrupting your flow. And it's incredibly inefficient. Can actually increase the time it takes to finish something by a whopping 500%.
Wow, 500%. That's insane.
It's like constantly checking your phone while you're trying to study. Every time you switch tasks or get distracted, your brain has to kind of like reorient itself, and that takes time and energy.
So the key is to really commit to focusing on one task.
Yeah.
Blocking out those distractions.
Exactly. It takes discipline, but the payoff is huge, both in how efficient you are and the quality of your work.
So pick a task, eat that frog, and just stay focused until it's done.
Exactly. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment to acknowledge our fantastic sponsor for this episode, cloutfit.ai. They're doing amazing things in the fashion commerce world. They're using AI to help connect brands with the right customers, ultimately boost sales. It's all about working smarter, not harder.
Which aligns perfectly with everything we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
So if you are interested in learning more about how cloutfit.ai is, kind of revolutionizing the fashion industry, check out their website, cloutfit.ai. That's cloutfit.ai.
Now back to Brian Tracy. We've talked about mindset, we've talked about time management, and even tackling those less than thrilling tasks. But Tracy doesn't stop there. He also gives us some really valuable strategies for managing stress, which, let's face it, is a constant companion for a lot of students.
Oh, yeah. Stress was like my default setting back in my student days. So anything that can help dial that down, I'm all for it.
Well, in our next segment, we'll dive into some of Tracy's most effective stress-busting techniques, helping you navigate those demands of student life with a bit more ease and resilience. So we've laid some really solid groundwork, with mindset and time management. But let's face it, school, it can be super stressful.
Oh, yeah.
Tracy totally gets that, and he actually offers some really practical ways to, kind of handle that pressure instead of letting it just crush you.
Okay, yeah. Back in my student days, stress was like my permanent state of being. So I'm definitely all ears for anything that can help dial that down.
Well, one of his simplest yet most effective suggestions is to just be, ridiculously well prepared before you even start a task. It's kind of like that old saying, measure twice, cut once, but for studying.
So instead of just, diving headfirst into an assignment, I should take a minute to, gather all my supplies, my books, notes, highlighters, maybe even a comfy chair and a cup of tea, like the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. When you have everything you need right there at your fingertips, you're less likely to get frustrated, sidetracked, which can really reduce those stress levels. It's like clearing the clutter from your mind and your workspace.
Yeah, it's like creating this calm and focused environment, right, for your brain to thrive in.
Precisely. And another major stress trigger for a lot of students is that pressure to be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Tracy has some really wise words on this too.
Yeah, I remember that feeling of, wanting every single assignment to be absolutely flawless.
Right.
And it actually made me procrastinate even more because I was so scared of messing up.
Tracy encourages us to aim for excellence, not perfection.
Okay.
He reminds us that it's way better to get something done, even imperfectly, than to not get it done at all.
So instead of agonizing over that perfect first draft, I should just focus on getting my ideas down and then go back and refine them later.
Exactly. It goes back to that mile markers analogy we talked about earlier.
Right.
Break down big tasks into smaller steps, and don't be afraid to, make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, it's a process, not a pressure cooker.
Exactly. And in today's, digital world, one of the biggest sources of stress is, of course, technology.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right.
I feel like I'm constantly bombarded with notifications and emails and social media. It's hard to focus on anything for more than 5 minutes.
Tracy totally acknowledges that challenge, and he emphasizes how important it is to be mindful of how we use technology. He reminds us that it can be either a powerful tool or a terrible master.
Right.
It really depends on how we choose to use it.
So it's not about ditching technology completely,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's more about becoming more aware of it, more intentional with how we use it.
Exactly. And he actually offers some really practical tips for doing that. Okay. One of the most effective is to manage your notifications ruthlessly.
Uh-huh.
Those pings and buzzes, they're designed to hijack our attention.
Yeah.
So turn off as many non-essential notifications as you can, both on your phone and your computer.
Okay, out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
But what about all the important emails and messages, the ones that you actually need to see?
Well, for those, Tracy suggests designating specific times to check them instead of letting them interrupt you throughout the day.
Okay.
You could check your inbox maybe twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon.
Right, so it's about creating boundaries,
Yes.
right? Actually setting aside time for those tasks instead of letting them just bleed into everything else.
Exactly. And another powerful technique for managing our, relationship with technology is what Tracy calls creative procrastination.
Creative procrastination.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not just avoiding tasks completely, we're being strategic about it.
You got it. It's about recognizing that we simply can't do everything, so we need to be really thoughtful about how we prioritize.
Okay.
Tracy actually encourages us to create a not-to-do list.
A not-to-do list.
Yeah, to identify those tasks that we can either delegate, defer, or just eliminate altogether.
I love that.
Right.
So it's not just about the to-do list. It's about the not-to-do list. It's like giving yourself permission to say no to some things so you can say yes to the things that really matter.
Absolutely. Now, this takes discipline. It takes self-awareness.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly empowering to make conscious choices about how you spend your time and energy.
It's like being the CEO of your own life, right?
Right.
You get to decide what's important and what's not.
Exactly. Now, with all these strategies for managing stress and technology, let's remember the core of Tracy's method. eat that frog.
Okay, back to the frog.
Right.
Remind us, what's that all about again?
It's about identifying your most important task, that big, ugly frog that you've been putting off, and just tackling it first thing in the day.
So, like, if I have this giant research paper looming over me,
Mhm.
I should work on that before I even, like, check my email or scroll through social media.
Exactly. And there are a few powerful reasons why this is so effective.
Okay.
First, it forces you to prioritize. You're not letting those smaller, less important tasks, clutter your mind.
Yeah.
You start your day with a clear focus on what truly matters.
It's like, okay, brain, this is the main event. Let's do this.
Exactly. And second, it builds momentum. When you conquer that biggest frog first, everything else feels so much more manageable.
It's that, wow, if I can do that, I can do anything feeling.
Exactly. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but what if that biggest frog is the hardest thing on my list?
Yeah.
What if I just don't feel like doing it?
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. The problem is, it doesn't go away. It just kind of looms larger in our minds, creating more stress and anxiety. That's why Tracy says tackling it head on, even for a short amount of time, is so important.
So even if I don't finish the whole thing, just starting is a win.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Once you overcome that initial resistance and actually start working on it, you often find it's not as bad as you thought.
Yeah, it's that, okay, I'm actually making progress here. I can do this feeling.
Exactly. And that feeling of progress, it can be incredibly motivating.
Yeah.
Now, let's make this a bit more concrete. Let's bring this to life with some examples.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's hard to see how these concepts actually work, in real life.
Okay, so let's say you have a big research paper due next month. Instead of panicking about it later, you could eat that frog by spending just 30 minutes today brainstorming topics, gathering some sources, or even just creating a basic outline.
Okay, so breaking that huge task down into something smaller and more manageable.
Exactly. Or let's say you're dreading a really dense chapter in your history textbook.
Yeah.
Instead of putting it off, you could eat that frog by quickly skimming it first, just to get the big picture. Then when you actually sit down to study it, the material will feel more familiar, less intimidating.
I like that. It's like dipping your toes in the water before you, jump in head first.
Precisely. And by tackling those challenging tasks early on, you're not only freeing up mental space, but you're also building confidence and momentum.
So if there was one thing you want our listeners to remember about this eat that frog technique, what would it be?
It's simple. What's your biggest frog right now? What's that one task you've been putting off, even though you know it's important? Identify it and commit to tackling it for at least 15 minutes before you do anything else today.
Even a small step can make a huge difference. Now, I know we've covered a lot, but Tracy has even more to share.
He does. And in our final segment, we'll explore some of his key principles for effective learning and memory, helping you not just study smarter, but remember that information for the long haul.
Don't miss it. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. And we are back. Ready to wrap up our deep dive into Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog for students.
We've covered so much, from those mindset shifts to taming those time management monsters to actually, getting ourselves motivated to study, even for those subjects that, well, maybe make us yawn a little.
It really has been a whirlwind tour of productivity. And what I find so striking about Tracy's approach is that it's not just about, those quick hacks or tricks. It's really about building that solid foundation for success, and that starts with the right mindset.
Absolutely. And he really emphasizes, right, like we need to believe in ourselves, we need to take responsibility for our learning, and we need to connect what we're studying to those bigger goals that we have. It's not just about getting through school. It's about like really thriving in life.
Exactly. And once you have that foundation in place, then Tracy gives us this like treasure trove of practical techniques.
We talked about setting clear goals, breaking down those massive tasks into smaller chunks, and actually scheduling our study time strategically, even for those little bits of free time that we have.
One of my favorite takeaways is that idea of matching your study method to the time you have available.
Right.
Like short bursts for those quick reviews, longer stretches for the deeper dives into the material. It's like having all these different tools in your study toolkit.
Exactly. And then, of course, we can't forget about the star of the show, the Eat That Frog technique itself.
The frog.
Tackling your most important and often most dreaded task first thing in the day. It's a complete game changer for productivity and focus.
It really does force you to prioritize,
Yeah.
right? And stop letting those smaller, less important tasks just kind of take over your day. It's like clearing the mental clutter and making space for what really truly matters.
Exactly. And Tracy reminds us that even if we don't finish that whole frog in one go, just getting started, that's a victory in itself. It's about progress, one step at a time.
Yeah. And we can't forget about all those digital distractions lurking around every corner. We talked about, managing those notifications, setting boundaries with our technology, and even practicing that creative procrastination. It's all about taking control, right? Like taking control of our time and our attention.
Being intentional, being strategic with both our tasks and how we use technology. And I think Tracy's methods really give us the power to work smarter, not harder.
Totally. And to achieve our goals with, more ease and confidence.
Exactly.
So if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this whole deep dive, it's this. You have the power to make your study habits work for you, not against you.
You can become the architect of your own learning journey, embracing the challenges, finding strategies that help you not just survive, but thrive.
Yes. And speaking of thriving, remember how CloutFit.ai is using AI to revolutionize the fashion industry? Well, you can use Ryan Tracy's wisdom to revolutionize your study habits.
If you're in the fashion world and want to see how CloutFit.ai is boosting brand engagement and driving revenue, check them out. CloutFit.ai. That's CLOUTFIT.ai.
It's all about embracing innovation, finding the tools and strategies that help you reach your full potential. Now, before we sign off, Tracy mentioned something really fascinating. He says, the more you learn, the faster you learn.
It's like building mental muscle, right? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. What's one skill you could improve that would make all your studying easier? Maybe it's speed reading, maybe it's note-taking, or mastering a specific study technique. Whatever it is, commit to investing in that skill and watch your learning soar.
That's a fantastic challenge to leave our listeners with. Remember, learning is a lifelong adventure, and there's always room to grow.
Absolutely. Keep those frogs coming, and we'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to, expand your mind and spark your curiosity.
Until then, happy studying.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more insightful and entertaining explorations of the world of knowledge. We'll see you next time.